Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today I thought I'd try something new and a little bit different, which is the I love the book, I love the movie tag. Now this was originally created by Joey from his channel name escapes me, but I will link it down below and the original video if it still exists. But I first saw the video on Megan Hannett's channel, Megan the Story Girl, which I will also link down below. Now, she was quite good and actually tagged people, which is fabulous. I never have the courage to do that, so well done, Megan. And I was not one of them. I did not have a channel at the time. But I thought, what better time of year than when it's cold and dark to do a tag about curling up with good books and good films. So I thought I'd give it a try and share my thoughts with all of you, and hopefully neither Megan nor Joey will mind. So a couple of things before we get started. Megan and I do have a lot of the same favorite movies, so I would encourage you to check out her video and get some more fabulous recommendations. So I tried to pick books and films that were different to the ones that she picked, which I think I have done. In addition, I tried to stay away from television series, although 3-ish have snuck their way in. But I tried to stick to just films. Additionally, I'm not going to include any of my favorite Jane Austen adaptations because I already made an entire video about all my favorite Austen films, so I will link that down below as well so you can check that out, because the fact that I love Jane Austen films really goes without saying. Did I make too many rules for this video? Quite possibly. So let's dive in. The first book and film pairing that I loved is Amazing Grace. The book is by Eric Metaxas, and it is a biography of William Wilberforce, who is credited as being one of the leaders of the abolition movement in England in the late 1700s and early 1800s. Fun fact that I didn't realize until I finished reading this book, Eric Metaxas was also one of the writers on the television series VeggieTales. This biography was then turned into the film Amazing Grace, which stars Johan Gruffud, Romola Gary, Albert Finney, Benedict Cumberbatch, Ciarán Hinds, Rufus Sewell, Michael Gambon. I mean, the cast just goes on and on and on and gets better and better. And it tells the story of William Wilberforce and who he met along his journey, the struggles that he had trying to reconcile his very deep faith. He was a Methodist when it was extremely unpopular to be a Methodist rather than straight up Church of England, with his desire to do good in the world of politics. And he felt like those two ambitions would be polar opposites, which, let's face it, a lot of people still feel like those two aims would be polar opposites. But luckily he met a group of really wonderful people, including Hannah More and Thomas Clarkson and many other wonderful thinkers and political figures, William Pitt. I forget whether he's the elder or the younger at this point. I think he's the younger, but don't quote me on it. In order to see this cause through. And it is funny, it is moving, it is inspiring, it is really, really wonderful. And it's named Amazing Grace because John Newton, the former slave ship captain who then had a conversion experience, left the slave trade, and consequently wrote the hymn Amazing Grace about that experience, was William Wilberforce's minister at one point, and he shows up in this film as well. So I would highly recommend checking out both of these adaptations of Wilberforce's life. My next choice is Stardust by Neil Gaiman. This I actually read after I saw the film. I was completely unfamiliar with Neil Gaiman as a writer before I went to see this film, but I had seen the commercials for it on television and thought it looked amazing. Had one of the most wonderful movie theater experiences I have ever had watching this. I had never seen a fantasy film be so gripping, so moving, so exciting, so funny, all of those things rolled into one, with told by an amazing cast and a wonderful soundtrack. And then I found out it was a book, so I tracked down a copy. If you haven't read or seen either, please, please do so. They do change one or two things, I believe, between the book and the film, but to me they both work really, really well. And they're not so far off that they are unrecognizable from each other. If you're unfamiliar, this is the story of Tristan, who's a young man growing up in a small English town who is divided by a wall, and no one ever crosses the wall. But one day he sees a falling star, and as he tries to pursue the town's it girl, Victoria, he promises to get her that fallen star. And so he crosses the wall and finds out that on the other side of that wall is a fantasy land, and that star is a young woman. And everyone is trying to get their hands on this star. They are wonderful, 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 both of them. I would highly recommend checking out both of these adaptations. The next film and book that I thought did a wonderful job was Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. I read this book again after I saw the film, which in this case I think really helped. I think it really helps with these long Russian novels to see an adaptation of it before you read it, so you can sort out who the characters are, what the plot is, so you can really appreciate the writing. And the film adaptation that I saw and loved was this adaptation with Keira Knightley, Jude Law, Matthew McFadden, the list goes on and on and on. What I loved about this film was not only how rich and opulent it felt, which is always a lot of fun, but I loved the concept behind the set design and the cinematography. If you haven't seen this film before, it is shot as though it is all on a stage. And characters are constantly changing costumes seamlessly, sets are being moved. The wings and the flies of the theater serve the purpose of being sort of the back streets and the lower class areas of society. It is incredible to watch, but I read an interview around the time that this came out that said that the reason they chose that concept was the idea that most people, especially upper class people in the later 19th century, lived their lives as though they were on a stage. Someone was always watching you, judging you, observing you, so you had to behave in a certain way. So they made the set reflect that, which I thought was really, really clever. The next film and book that I absolutely loved is one of my cheeky miniseries picks, but it is Poldark, the Poldark series by Winston Graham. I, again, watched the series before I realized that it was books, but I only made it through the first series of the television series before I started reading the books. After that, I always managed to read the books ahead of the series. These stories, if you're not familiar, are about Captain Ross Poldark, who comes back from fighting on the side of the British in the American Revolution, only to find that his father has died, the estate that he is to inherit is in complete disarray, and his sweetheart is now engaged to his cousin. All of his adventures in Cornwall, trying to make a go of his farm and his mines, and negotiating various family relationships, and the changing society of late Georgian and Regency England. It is fantastic. And I thought that this latest television series did a fabulous job of staying so true to all of the novels and making them just as exciting and wonderful as the books were, with the exception of Series 5. I have not watched Series or Season 5. I watched the first episode, and it was doing lots of really wonderful things, but veered so off track from book 8 in the series, which is where they should have been. And having read ahead and into books 8 and 9 and knowing where Winston Graham took those characters, I just couldn't watch Series 5. but series 1 through 4 were amazing adaptations of books 1 through 7. My next choice is for a film that I don't actually own, but it is Tulip Fever by Deborah Moggick. Deborah Moggick also wrote the screenplay for the film, so of course they are very, very accurate and true to each other. And they are both gripping, beautifully shot. The way that her writing in the novel leads you from scene to scene is so incredible. I truly loved it. It is the story of a young woman in 17th century Amsterdam who is married to a very wealthy merchant, and her struggle as she suddenly begins to fall in love with the painter that her husband hires to paint their portrait. And they begin to plot their escape through the use of the tulip market. It sounds strange, but it is so wonderfully done. The novel is wonderful. Again, I saw the film first before I realized that it was a novel. And the film stars Alicia Vikander, Christoph Waltz, and Judi Dench even plays a small role. It was wonderful. The next book and film that I loved equally was Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. This was a book that I luckily read before seeing the film. I read this for my senior seminar for my English degree in my undergraduate years, and it was my favorite of the 4 Hardy novels that we read that semester. It is just beautiful. If you're not familiar, it is the story of Bathsheba Everdeen, who unexpectedly inherits her uncle's farm and has to make a go of it as a single, independent female landowner, and is doing really well. However, her love life is in rather a shambles, as she is faced with the prospects of Farmer Boldwood, who owns the neighboring estate, who would provide her with security, Sergeant Troy, who is a dashing young soldier, and Gabriel Oak, one of her employees, who is as steady as his name. I loved everyone in this novel. The intrigues were wonderful. The almost Greek chorus of the locals were so sweet and endearing. I truly, truly loved it. And then, a few years later, this film came out starring Carey Mulligan and Matthew Schoenaerts, among others, and it was beautiful. The scenery and the cinematography were gorgeous. The soundtrack is ravishing. And everyone played their parts so well. I thought Carey Mulligan was the best Bathsheba I have ever seen. Michael Sheen brought this wonderful vulnerability to Farmer Boldwood. And, it was just perfect. So perfect, in fact, that a few months later, I got to see Carey Mulligan on Broadway, and I got her to sign my book. My next choice may seem a little out of place after all of these classics and historical fiction, but stay with me, and that is Paddington. The Paddington books by Michael Bond have been my favorites since I was 5 years old. They are just silly and sweet and endearing and carry such a wonderful message. If you're not familiar with them, they tell the story of Paddington Bear, who emigrates from darkest Peru to London and is adopted by the Brown family. And Paddington always means well, but things never quite work out the way he thinks they're going to. And having loved these books all of my life, I was a little nervous when I heard that they were turning them into films. This was a film that my whole family went to see, including my father, and it is difficult to get my father to the movies. And we all loved it. Everyone played their parts beautifully. They did update the setting to be modern London, as these books were written in the 1960s, and they did have to insert an overarching plot to carry you through the film. but I thought that plot worked beautifully. I thought the message that they picked up on the fact that Paddington is an immigrant spoke so well to all sorts of debates that we are having today in politics. Everyone just fit their roles beautifully. It had this wonderful heart and coziness, and it is just the perfect film. Here it is, my second cheeky miniseries. What's it going to be? Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. I read this monster of a book the summer that I started my graduate degree and flew through it. I had several long car trips during that period, and that is saying something considering how long a book this is, but it is so perfect. I always describe it as Jane Austen meets Neil Gaiman, because it takes place in an alternative Regency England where magic used to be quite common, but nowadays gentlemen magicians would never dirty their hands with actually performing magic. They simply study its history. Until one day, they hear that Mr. Norrell of York is a practical magician. And that's when everything changes for him and for Jonathan Strange when he enters his life. This book was so gripping. It was so perfect. I loved the fantastical elements. I loved the footnotes. I loved the humor. I loved how accurate it was to Regency life. It was just perfect. Definitely pick it up. So then after my friend Jonathan and I read that together, they announced that they would be adapting it for a miniseries on BBC America. And we were a little nervous, but the more we saw of it, the more we loved it. It is perfect. It is the perfect adaptation of the humor, of the fantasy, of the excitement. We spent the last half hour of the final episode not letting go of each other's hands, because even though we knew what the outcome was going to be, we were still on the edge of our seats. It is a wonderful adaptation. The next wonderful adaptation that I have both read and loved was The History of Tom Jones, a Foundling by Henry Fielding. Again, I am quite impressed that I read this at all, as it is another monster of an 18th century book about the foundling Tom Jones, who is adopted into Squire Allworthy's family, and how eventually he grows up to be a bit of a rake, but his ultimate goal is to win the heart of Sophia Weston, who lives on the neighboring estate. However, he manages to get himself into all sorts of scrapes, such that neither one of their families think that he would be a suitable match for her. So he then finds himself ranging all over the country as a soldier, as rather a gigolo, and everything in between, all the while trying to find his way back to Sophia. It is a wonderful book, and I'm very glad that I actually saw the film first. This was turned into a film in the 60s or 70s, I'm not sure which, starring Albert Finney. And it's very interesting seeing Albert Finney here as John Newton, as an old man, and then watching Tom Jones and seeing him as a much younger man. But this film, I think, captures the utter joy and silliness of 18th century novels. There are some wonderful chase scenes that happen that you get in the book, but when you see them on screen, all they need is the Benny Hill chase music in the background. And that just makes it for me and is a perfect summation of what most 18th century literature was doing at the time. The last book to film adaptation that I loved and adored was Possession by A.S. Byatt. This is another one where I ended up watching the film before I read the book. I know, naughty me, but I didn't know it existed. It tells the story of two modern-day scholars, literary critics, who are devoted to two different Victorian poets. And one day, the man of the two scholars discovers some letters that reveal what could be a hitherto unknown area of his poet's life involving another Victorian poet. So he goes to seek out this female scholar's advice, and the two of them are then on a race against other literary scholars to find this information before someone else can claim it as their own discovery, and in addition, discovering the true story of what happened between these two poets. It was a brilliant film. I loved it. I had no idea what it was going to be about going into it. I simply knew, here it is, yes, I have the film cover on a book, controversial choice, but I love it nonetheless. I went into it simply knowing that it starred Jeremy Northam and Jennifer Ehle and Gwyneth Paltrow, and at 15 I said, yes please, thank you. And I was not wrong. Toby Stephens shows up as well. It is a truly wonderful film and book. So those were, I believe, 10, but I have some honorable mentions to get to. The first are two more mini-series that I didn't feel like I could have on this list, but what the hey. The first is Little Dorrit, so the 2009 adaptation by the BBC, and the novel by Charles Dickens. This tells the story of Amy Dorrit, who was born into the Marshalsea debtors' prison, and she is allowed to come and go to work, but her father must remain there until he is able to pay off his debts. And so she gets a job as a seamstress for Mrs. Clenham, whose son Arthur has just returned from abroad after his father's death, which has revealed a secret to him that he is determined to uncover. At the same time, he and Amy develop a friendship. Is it something more? Maybe not. And it charts both of their families' rises and falls in fortune. It is another chunkster. You need to dedicate a lot of time to this, but it is so worth it. And what I discovered here in reading it is exactly how much Dickens was a writer for actors, especially when you read Mr. Dorrit's dialogue. I thought Tom Courtenay played Mr. Dorrit beautifully in this adaptation. I mean, Claire Foy and Matthew McFadden did a wonderful job, Russell Tovey, so many wonderful people. But Tom Courtenay did a wonderful job, and I thought he had characterized Mr. Dorrit very well. No. Dickens wrote in all of his ums and ahs and that anxious stumbling and searching for words into the text. And that blew me away. So definitely read and watch this series. You can do it in either order. And the last cheeky mini-series that has made its way onto this list is North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. How could I not include this? This is another one that I watched before I read, but I did them in fairly short succession. I found this on YouTube when I was living in Spain, and so then my mother sent me the book to keep me occupied, and I read this my entire flight home from Seville. It was a beautiful experience. They do change some things between the series and the book, but I thought, again, each of them worked in their own ways, and I did not have a problem with any of the changes that they made. I thought they each characterized each of the characters beautifully with tiny little details and tiny little moments that are so important. Down to, there's a scene in here where Mr. Thornton is over at the Hales. He's over at the Hales for tea, and Margaret is trying to pour the tea. And in the book it describes that she's wearing this bracelet that keeps getting in her way, so she keeps shoving it up her arm, and it keeps slipping down again. And it describes how Mr. Thornton is just transfixed by it, and he keeps watching her do it, such that he could almost predict, oh, there it goes again. Which I thought was such a beautiful little touch. And then I got to the series and I rewatched it, And when you get to that scene where he is at the Thorntons for tea, you can see his eyes going up and down Margaret's arm. And Margaret is out of shot. You can't see what she's doing. But his eyes are still tracking where her arm probably is. It's the same angle. And I thought, oh my gosh, he took that. He knows. So definitely watch and read this adaptation as well. It is beautiful. I'm terribly sorry. There's a 5th mini-series, but it's one that I have been banging on about on this channel since I started it, and I have no regrets. It is Gentleman Jack, which is based on a couple of books. The series tells the story of Anne Lister's life, well, 1 year of her life, 1832 to 33, I believe. And it is so wonderfully acted. It is so fantastically done. And I would actually recommend... Actually, no, you don't have to have watched the series before you read the book, or vice versa. I think if you do it in either direction, you will still get a lot out of both. Anne Lister was essentially the first woman that we know of to live as openly as a gay woman as she could have at that time. And we only know this because of her diaries, which were in code and decoded several times, but only published in the 1990s. I've said all of this before in my favorite books of the year video and in my June wrap-up, but definitely check her out. She was incredible. So, the series is fabulous. It is based on several books. The first, which I would recommend reading first, is the biography Gentleman Jack by Angela Steidele, which gives you a more comprehensive look at Anne Lister's life from birth to death. Once you have the basic arc of her life down and sorted out who's who and what's what of her friends and family, then I would recommend diving into her diaries themselves. So we have The Secret Diaries of Miss Anne Lister, and Volume 2, No Priest But Love, which were edited by Helena Whitbread. I believe you can also get them in older editions as one full bind-up. Any way you read them would be wonderful. They are really fascinating. And the last book-to-film adaptation that I couldn't help popping in just to get a little bit more non-fiction in this list is Belle, the story of the adopted daughter of the Lord Chief Justice, who I also believe was Lord Mansfield. This is the story of Dido Bell, and her biography was written by Paula Byrne, who is one of my favorite Jane Austen scholars. And Dido Bell lived during the Georgian and Regency period, so Jane Austen would have been well aware of her. Lord Mansfield was her adopted father, and she grew up alongside his white daughter, but occupied a very strange place in society, in that when it was just the family at home, she could eat with them, be educated with them, live as equals. But if guests came, she was not invited to dinner. She had to eat in the servants' quarters, simply because of her color, and because of Lord Mansfield's position, he didn't wish to offend any of his dinner guests. However, I need to double check this before I say it because I'm not sure. I'm not sure, but I believe Lord Mansfield had to preside over a case which questioned the legality of the slave trade. And it was at that point that his morals and his beliefs were put to the test. And this was made into a film a few years ago now, which I traveled hours to go and see because it was not released widely throughout this country, which was a real shame. And it starred Gugu Mbatha-Raw and Tom Wilkinson, Miranda Richardson, Tom Felton, Matthew Good, an incredible list of actors. And it so highlighted an area of history that is only now coming to the surface and getting the recognition that it needs. So I would highly encourage you to read this book and track down the film wherever you can. So that is it. Those are some of my other favorite book to movie slash series adaptations. Let me know down below if you have seen and loved any of these, if you have other recommendations for me based on the list that I have given, and maybe check out some of these films yourself if I have inspired you to watch any or read any of these books. Until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone!